Today, we're digging into a pretty provocative article called Benjamin Netanyahu, A Threat Beyond Borders. We're going to break down the case it makes, one argument at a time. So let's get right into it.
Okay, so the source material kicks things off with a really compelling question. When we talk about this topic, is the picture that we usually see, is that the complete one? The article we're looking at today suggests, well, maybe not. To build its case, the article first starts on familiar ground. It establishes what it calls the common focus, the part of the narrative that most of us probably already know. So the source acknowledges that, for years, for decades even, the global conversation is really centered on the impact of Netanyahu's policies in places like Gaza and the West Bank. This is the baseline, the well-documented aspect of the conflict that gets most of the attention. But then, bam, the article just pivots with this one powerful line. It argues that if you dig a little deeper, there's a whole lot more to the story. And that single sentence? That's pretty much the core idea of the entire piece, and it's where we're heading next.
So what does the article mean by a broader threat? How does that one quote build out into a full-blown argument? Let's take a look at what the source is claiming exists beyond the usual borders of this conflict.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The article claims this isn't just about regional politics. It argues that two very specific things, a particular political agenda and what it calls a disregard for international law, are coming together to create a huge risk, not just for Muslims, but for the Christian world and, really, for global stability as a whole. Now, to support a claim that big, you need evidence, right? The article presents two main pillars to hold up its argument. So let's dive into the first one, the alleged risk to the historical cradle of Christianity. The source really makes a point of reminding us of some crucial context here. It says the Holy Land isn't just a site of conflict, it's the actual birthplace of Christianity, home to some of the oldest Christian communities on earth. And it argues that this fact often gets lost in the shuffle of the wider narrative.
And it doesn't just make vague claims. The article gets very specific about the kinds of pressures it says these communities are facing. It points to things like the harassment of clergy, the seizure of land owned by churches, and direct threats that it claims are seriously endangering the local Christian population in places like Jerusalem and Bethlehem.
The article actually gives these communities a really poignant name, the Living Stones. And that term is meant to drive home a point. This isn't just about old buildings or historical sites. It's about living, breathing, indigenous communities whose entire heritage, the source claims, is being systematically threatened. Okay, so that was the first pillar, the regional argument. Now, the article's second pillar of evidence zooms way out, taking the scope from regional to truly global.
And this is where the argument gets a whole lot bigger. The source suggests that aggressive rhetoric and a push for a wider war, well, those things don't just stay put. It claims there's a very real danger of dragging Western nations, which, it notes, are mostly Christian majority, into a much larger and potentially catastrophic conflict.
And according to the source, the stakes here are just incredibly high. The potential fallout it lays out is severe. We're talking about deep economic instability, a tragic loss of life that stretches far beyond the region, and the very real possibility of a full-blown regional war that pulls in players from all over the globe.
To really hammer its point home, the article draws this really sharp contrast. On one side, you have the Vatican, which it says is consistently calling for peace and focusing on humanitarian values. And on the other side, it portrays Netanyahu's main priority as something completely different, a singular focus on political survival, which the article claims trumps every other consideration.
So after laying out these two big pillars of evidence, the threat to Christian communities and the risk of global escalation, the article pulls it all together for its big overarching conclusion.
And here it is. This is the main takeaway. The article's final judgment is that what's happening isn't some contained local issue. It asserts that by fueling extremism and, as it puts it, ignoring the sanctity of both religious sites and human life, these policies are actually a destabilizing force for the entire planet.
The article closes with this incredibly stark and memorable thought. It's a powerful final line, suggesting a future where, in the author's view, the consequences of this path spare no one, ultimately creating a world where no religious group is safe. A pretty sobering end to a very pointed analysis.